Hey there. So we're diving deep into green IT today, what it is, why it matters now more than ever, and how it's actually playing out in the tech world. And with the notes you sent, looks like we've got some really interesting stuff to unpack. First things first, when we say green IT, what exactly are we talking about?
Well, it's kind of fascinating, actually. Green IT or green computing, it all comes down to sustainability, but specifically within tech, right? It's about making sure that all these computing resources we use, I'm talking everything from those massive data centers to like your laptop have the smallest environmental impact possible, and importantly, throughout their entire life cycle.
Life cycle. So more than just remembering to shut down my computer at night.
Way more, yeah. I mean, think about it. It all starts with mining and manufacturing the components. Then there's the actual usage, and finally, how we get rid of everything responsibly. And honestly, our current tech obsession, not exactly known for being eco-friendly, green IT is all about changing that.
Right. Makes total sense, especially with how much we depend on tech these days. Speaking of what makes green IT tick, our notes highlight energy efficiency as a major factor. No big surprise there.
Definitely the cornerstone. But we're not just talking about dimming your screen brightness here. We're talking about squeezing every last drop of performance out of every watt of electricity. Especially in those energy-hungry data centers, they're like the elephants in the room of the tech world, you know.
Okay, so efficiency at scale. Got it. Now, I'm also seeing reducing e-waste in these notes. What are some things people might not even consider when it comes to e-waste?
You'd be surprised how often the less obvious culprits get overlooked. It's not just about that old phone gathering dust in your drawer. Think about things like printer cartridges, or even those tiny earbuds everyone has. They all end up contributing to a mountain of e-waste. Green IT wants to tackle that through things like responsible recycling and pushing for longer-lasting hardware designs.
Building devices that actually last. I'm all for that. Our research also mentions virtualization. Can you break that down for me?
Sure. It's a bit techie, but imagine this. Instead of a company needing a whole room full of servers, virtualization lets them create multiple virtual servers on just one physical one. It's kind of like how your phone runs multiple apps at once, all sharing the same hardware. But this is on a much larger scale, and this is where it gets really cool. This software layer essentially tricks the operating systems into thinking they each have their own dedicated hardware, which lets you optimize resources in a way that simply wasn't possible before.
So it's like maximizing what we already have, less physical stuff, less energy wasted. Now, with all this talk about energy efficiency and virtualization, are any companies actually putting this into practice in a big way?
Oh, absolutely. Google, for one, is right at the forefront. They're using AI in their data centers to optimize energy use, like in real time.
AI, wow, that's next level. How does that even work?
It's pretty wild. Picture a system that's constantly analyzing all sorts of data. We're talking temperature, server usage, even the weather forecast. Then it adjusts everything on the fly. Cooling systems, power distribution, the works.
Wow, I never would have thought of using AI like that. That's a real game changer. What about other companies? Apple, for instance. They're always going on about sustainability.
They're huge in the recycling game, that's for sure. They've got those trade-in programs, and get this, they even have a robot called Daisy that disassembles iPhones for recycling.
A robot disassembling iPhones. That's high-tech recycling. Okay, so we've got Google with AI, Apple with Daisy. What about Microsoft? They're kind of a big deal in tech.
Microsoft's made a pretty bold commitment. They're aiming to be carbon negative by 2030. They're pouring resources into renewable energy and even experimenting with underwater data centers.
Underwater data centers. Now, that's thinking outside the box. And it seems like green IT is more than just a trendy term. These tech giants are putting their money where their mouth is.
Totally. And it's not just about saving the planet, although that's a pretty major perk. It just makes good business sense, too.
All right, let's talk practicality for a sec. This all sounds fantastic, but is green IT actually doable for companies in the real world? Our notes mention cost savings, but also some initial investments. What's the deal there?
Well, it's a bit of a you got to spend money to save money situation. Switching to energy-efficient infrastructure, whether that's servers, cooling, even the building itself, takes an upfront investment.
So any concrete examples of how those costs might be outweighed by the long-term benefits?
Think of it this way. An energy-efficient data center means significantly lower electricity bills month after month, year after year. There are also potential tax breaks or subsidies for companies using renewable energy. And of course, they avoid those hefty fines for not complying with environmental regulations. It's an investment that can really pay off big time.
Makes sense. So it's not just about doing the right thing. It can be good for the bottom line, too. But are there any downsides, any potential drawbacks to going green that companies should be aware of?
Well, yeah, no solution is perfect, right? One of the biggest hurdles is definitely that initial cost. Like, say you want to retrofit a data center with all the latest energy efficient tech. That's going to cost you. And for smaller companies, a full-on green IT makeover might just not be in the cards.
That's a good point. So even with those long-term benefits, I get why some companies might be hesitant.
Exactly. And beyond the initial cost, there's the whole implementation side of things. It's not as easy as like swapping out some light bulbs, right? It often means a complete overhaul of their IT infrastructure, figuring out the right technologies for their needs, training employees on new systems, the whole shebang.
So it's a real commitment, not just a quick fix. But let's say a company is ready to take that step. How do they actually track their progress? Is it just about lower energy bills, or are there other ways to measure their green IT impact?
That's where those measurable metrics come in handy. Lower energy bills are definitely a good sign. But we can get way more specific. A big one is carbon footprint reduction, often measured in tons of CO2 emissions avoided. A lot of companies are aiming for carbon neutrality these days, basically meaning they offset as much as they produce.
Okay, yeah, I've heard that term carbon neutral.
Hmm.
But what about this whole carbon negative thing? Our notes mention Microsoft's going for that. What's the difference?
It's like taking it up a notch. Carbon negative means a company is actually offsetting more emissions than they generate, so they're having a net positive impact on the environment. It's like putting more money into your savings account than you're spending. You end up with a surplus.
I like that analogy. So it's like they're actively giving back to the planet, not just breaking even.
You got it. And speaking of giving back, e-waste reduction is another big one. It's not just about how much you recycle, but also how you can extend the lifespan of those devices, keep them out of the landfill in the first place.
So it goes back to that whole life cycle thing we were talking about.
Exactly. And this actually ties into another important metric, resource utilization. Are you really squeezing the most out of your existing IT infrastructure? Like we were saying, virtualization is huge for this. Lets companies do more with less hardware, which reduces waste overall.
Right. It's that work smarter, not harder idea, but for technology.
Nailed it. And all these metrics, while they're good for the planet, can actually make a real difference to a company's bottom line too, you know? Lower energy use, less waste, it all adds up.
So it's not an either situation at all. Companies can be environmentally responsible and profitable. But let's shift gears for a sec. Our notes also touch on green IT's impact on employees. I'm really interested in that connection.
Yeah, it's something we don't always think about, but it's actually huge. More and more, you've got employees, especially younger generations, who want to work for companies that share their values.
So it's not just about attracting those environmentally conscious customers. It's about attracting and keeping great employees, too.
Exactly. When people actually feel good about where they work, when they see their company making a real effort to be more sustainable, it makes a difference. You see higher morale, more engagement, even just a more positive work environment overall.
It's like that sense of purpose we all look for, right?
Yeah.
Knowing you're part of something bigger.
That's it. And that can be really powerful, both for the individual and the company as a whole.
Okay, I'm convinced. Green IT for a happier, more engaged workforce. But let's zoom out a bit and look at the bigger picture for a minute.
Yeah.
What does the future hold for green IT? What are some of the most interesting things on the horizon?
Ooh, this is where it gets really exciting. We've touched on things like AI-powered optimization, those decentralized data centers, but there's so much more going on. One of the coolest areas is the development of even more sustainable hardware. Like we're talking devices designed to last longer, use less energy, and be easier to recycle.
So it's not just about using tech differently. It's about fundamentally changing how we make it in the first place.
Absolutely. And it's not even just the devices themselves. It's about the materials, too. There's a ton of research going on right now with things like bio-based plastics, recycled materials, really trying to move away from those traditional components that are so harmful.
That's amazing. It's like we're completely rethinking tech from the ground up.
Mm.
But all this innovation, it can't happen on its own, right?
Mm-hmm.
What role do governments and regulations play in shaping the future of green IT?
Governments are crucial. We're seeing more and more policies and incentives aimed at getting businesses to adopt more sustainable practices.
Like what? Give me some examples.
Well, some countries are offering tax breaks for companies that invest in renewable energy or those energy-efficient technologies. Others are cracking down on e-waste disposal, making it way more expensive for companies to just chuck their old electronics in a landfill.
So it's a mix of carrots and sticks, rewards for doing good, and penalties if you don't.
Exactly. And honestly, those regulations are only going to get tougher as the world realizes how serious the consequences of our tech consumption really are. It's definitely motivating companies to get on board with green IT.
It's a classic case of get ahead of the curve. The companies that embrace these changes now will be the ones who really thrive in the future.
For sure. And it's not even just about regulations. We're seeing a change in what consumers want too. More and more people are looking for and supporting businesses that are environmentally responsible.
So it's not just about what companies should do, it's about what their customers are demanding.
Exactly. And that's where the real power of collective action comes in. When customers demand better, businesses have to listen.
It's like voting with your wallet, right?
Mm.
Every purchase is a chance to support companies that reflect your values.
100%. And that kind of collective action, along with all those technological advancements and those government incentives, that's what makes me hopeful for the future of green IT.
It really does seem like we're on the edge of a major shift in how we think about technology and its place in the world.
Absolutely. It's no longer a question of if things need to change, but how fast we can make it happen.
It's pretty incredible how much the conversation around tech has changed, even just in the past few years. It's not just about like faster, sleeker, more powerful anymore. It's about making sure that tech actually benefits people and the planet.
Definitely a step in the right direction. And it's not just happening at those big companies either. Individuals actually have more power than ever to make a real difference.
That's so true. It's easy to feel kind of helpless when you think about those massive global problems. But with green IT, even small changes can add up, right? What are some things our listeners can do in their own lives to be more tech conscious?
It all starts with awareness, just paying attention to how much you're actually using things, whether that's new gadgets, energy, even just how much digital storage space you're using. It's a good first step. Then you can ask yourself, do I really need this new thing, or is my old one fine?
It's like that reduce, reuse, recycle idea, but for our digital lives.
Exactly. And when it is finally time for an upgrade, got to make sure you're getting rid of your old stuff responsibly. Look for those e-waste recycling programs in your city. A lot of places have them these days. And don't forget about those little things, old chargers, cables. Those can really add up too.
It's all about being mindful about what we buy and how we get rid of it. What about the actual using of tech, though? Any tips there?
Oh, totally. Those simple things make a difference, like adjusting your power settings to save energy, using energy-saving modes, even just turning things off when you're not using them. It might not seem like much, but those little things really add up over time.
It's about breaking those tech habits we've all picked up, right? Like leaving our computers on all the time or charging our phones overnight even when they're already full. They all contribute.
Exactly. And here's another thing to think about the cloud. We hear all the time about how efficient it is, but storing everything in the cloud still means you need these huge data centers, which use a ton of energy. So be mindful of your digital footprint. Delete those old emails you never open, unsubscribe from those newsletters you never read, and get that cloud storage organized. No more digital hoarding.
Digital decluttering. I love that.
It's crazy how much energy and resources get wasted on stuff we don't even use. And speaking of not wasting, let's talk about making our devices last longer. I mean, making electronics is super resource intensive, so the longer we can keep them around, the better.
Right. So that idea of longer lasting hardware is key for green IT.
100%. And it's not just on the manufacturers either. We as consumers can do our part too. Simple things like using protective cases, keeping your devices clean, even just like trying not to drop them, it can really make a difference.
It sounds like being tech conscious isn't about giving up convenience or like not enjoying your devices anymore. It's just about being more aware and thoughtful in how we use tech.
Exactly. And that actually goes back to something we were discussing earlier, this idea of a cultural shift, not just a technological one.
It's a whole mindset change.
That's it. It's about realizing that our choices, even the little ones, they have an impact. And when enough people make those conscious choices, it can make a real difference.
It's actually really empowering to think about that we can each play a part in making a more sustainable future. Well, we've covered a lot of ground today, from the basics of green IT to the potential of AI, the role of governments, and even what we can do as individuals. This deep dive has definitely given us a lot to think about.
It's been a great conversation. Hopefully it's given your listeners some ideas about how they can make their own tech habits a little greener.
I think so too. So here's a final thought for everyone listening. As technology keeps changing so rapidly, what will the future of green IT look like? Will it just become so seamlessly woven into our lives that we don't even have to think about it anymore?
Now that would be something. To reach a point where sustainability isn't a separate thing to worry about, it's just built into everything from the start.
What an amazing vision for the future. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. And remember, every click, every byte, every decision, it all matters. Until next time, stay curious.